Welcome to this video for the Aspects of Comedy course with AQA. The main aim of this video is to show you an example response for Paper 1 Section C using two texts in answer to a task. And the two texts I'll be referring to are Oscar Wilde's The Importance of Being Earnest and AQA's comedic Anthology, which has 7 poems from 7 different poets. This is with AQA. So this is Paper 1 Section C. A reminder of the task: you have two tasks and you will choose one of them, don't do both, and you'll be talking about two texts. For me, it will be Ernest and the comedy poems in this video. Because you've only got 50 minutes, you're going to have to use those texts quite selectively. You don't have time to talk about everything. So 1 or 2 poems is enough, and perhaps one part of Ernest in terms of something that happens in Ernest. So it's this ability to zoom in and be able to zoom in and analyse in greater detail rather than running around the text more generally. There's no need to compare those texts together, and always, of course, answer the question. So be familiar with what the question is about and always answer through the lens of that question to stay on task. Don't go off on tangents. And the way to do that is to repeat the key word or phrases in the question throughout your essay to stay on track. It's closed book, so you won't have the text with you, and there's also no need to write a lengthy intro or conclusion because students often don't write anything of substance in them, and they can therefore be time wasters. So I would not want to see half a side of introduction, because just introducing what you're going to say. It's much more important to actually say it rather than introduce what you're going to say, if that makes sense. So, in keeping with what to expect in the exam, two tasks here. These tasks are broad. They're often written with the comedy aspects in mind, and they won't refer to specific texts because these questions will have to apply to about 8 texts, most of which, of course, you don't study. So I've done the power and privilege question in the previous video. In this video, I'm looking at the second task here about women being the principal sources of comedy. So an essay essentially looking at the female characters. Now, you can disagree with this, and you can say, actually, no, the men are pretty funny as well. But for the purposes of this essay task, I've agreed, and I'm just looking at the women as being very, very funny or humorous in comedy texts. In terms of the poems, I'm looking at My Rival's House and Mrs. Sisyphus, and a reminder that if you need to revise the poems, I have made videos already for all of the 7 poems in my comedy anthology playlist on my channel. So if you need to revise them, they are video 23 and video 24. In terms of a plan, because I know the text well, I can plan quite concisely. This took me 30 seconds, as you can see. So my plan is to talk about Gwen and Cecily from Act 2, where they have their afternoon tea. And in terms of the poetry, I'm going to be referring to My Rival's House and Sisyphus, as previously explained. But I could just do 1 poem if I wanted. I wouldn't necessarily have to do 2. But I want to do 2 because I quite like analysing poetry anyway. So you know when you're ready to sit an exam, when you can write everything you need on the back of a postage stamp, because the rest of it is long-term memory, it's ready to use, you've got the information there, this is just a prompt. I suppose it's why it's called a plan. It's what you plan to say. So, without further ado, let me show you what the essay actually looks like. We start with a very short intro, just introducing the text you're going to use, really, and agreeing with the question. So it says, Wilde's comedy of manners, Ernest, suggests that female characters are often the focus of a lot of comedic action, whereas the comedy poems My Rival's House and Mrs. Sisyphus also foreground the experiences and annoyances of female characters for the creation of humour. And then they literally just write a paragraph about Ernest, and that's it for the whole essay. So they block it all together and talk about one part of Ernest in one go. Wilde's play, The Importance of Being Earnest, features 4 female characters, and whereas Lady Bracknell could be a main source of humour because of her domineering and overbearing behaviour, Gwen and Cecily also provide a significant amount of comedy throughout the play, such as in Act 2, when they have their afternoon tea. Having come to Jack's country manor, Gwen engages in afternoon tea on the lawn with Cecily. The conversation becomes artificial and contrived, as Gwen states we are going to be great friends, even before she has sat down, which reinforces how the upper-class elite are being satirized in the play, in showing the shallow mask of manners. The dialogue between the two women gradually becomes more passive-aggressive because they believe they are engaged to the same man. This not only shows how trivial and shallow both women are, to put so much importance on names, but also shows the success of Jack and Algy and their cunning deception. The fact that they think they are both engaged to Ernest comically alludes to the trickery of the men and is at odds with how earnestness was meant to show seriousness and respectability, reinforcing the pun of the title. Rather than outwardly expressing the distaste that each woman has for the other, they hide their dislike through tea, cake, and bread and butter. After receiving cake, despite asking for bread and butter, Gwen exclaims, "From the moment I saw you, I distrusted you. I thought you were false and deceitful," which contradicts with what she said when she first met Cecily. As a result, the comedy remains hidden under the surface because of the restrictive nature of proper society, and the audience delights in seeing characters squirming as their real feelings of bitterness and resentment remain hidden in the quest to appear mannerly. So there's that good phrase there that society is a restrictive force. It prevents them from being open and honest. It actually makes them hide their true feelings, and that kind of feeling manifests itself in other ways. So what is left to do then is talk about both poems. In Lockheed's My Rival's House, the setting of the immaculate middle-class house is very important when considering the thoughts and feelings of the female speaker and the relationship she has with her mother-in-law. The house represents a place where the mother-in-law has most power and authority, and this makes the speaker, the daughter-in-law, feel exposed and paranoid. The domestic setting and concept of having afternoon tea to be polite is therefore contrasted with the deep-rooted feelings of bitterness and resentment that the female speaker feels. Because of her desire to make a good impression and display the mask of manners, it means that the speaker feels restricted and cannot openly declare her true feelings. The tables, which are polished so much you can see distortions in the surface, and the uncomfortable cushions represent the speaker's mental anguish in this location. Furthermore, the fact the speaker removes her shoes at the door to protect the flooring symbolizes the request to live by other people's rules, which creates a sense of unfamiliarity. The word surface is repeated throughout, which demonstrates how the speaker feels hollow and empty because of the domineering force of the mother, a common archetype in comedy representing the archetypal battle-axe comic villain. The minor sentences, Queen Bee and Lady of the House, shows the speaker is sarcastic and mocking of the mother-in-law's status in this domain, and acknowledges that the mother is her worst enemy. The semantic field of war, seen through foul, survival, and enemy, perhaps comically exaggerates the speaker's discomfort in the mother's presence. As a result, the poem presents the rivalry between two women, as well as showing each woman trying to compete for supreme position, which can be humorous for the reader. And again, one poem is enough. You might not even have to talk about a second poem, but let's say you have enough time to. I'm going to finish the essay off by looking at Mrs. Sisyphus. In Duffy's Mrs. Sisyphus, the outspoken nature of the wife provides much humour. Her husband has been told to push an immense boulder up a hill, only to watch it roll back down again. As a result, his work is never complete, and Duffy undercuts this myth of high art and culture by likening the man's toil to the modern concept of being a workaholic, and sacrificing his marriage for his work. This is why Mrs. Sisyphus is annoyed, which is shown through her colloquial language. She wastes no time in calling her husband a jerk or a dork, dismissing his excuses as a load of old bollocks. She even trivializes the difficulty of her husband's work by suggesting he pushes a stone up a hill, when actually the boulder is 3 times the size of him. This bitterness comes from how she is forced to lie alone in the dark while he works, so she feels neglected while everyone laughs at them for having such a ridiculous marriage. It is worth noting that the word work is kept until last in the poem, which is the cause of the conflict and their rivalry as a married couple. This is why the speaker admits, perhaps comically, that she could stab him with a dirk as revenge for his neglect of her. In this poem, the rivalry is created by Sisyphus's approach to his work, which creates a dysfunctional relationship rather than a romantically utopian marriage between the couple. Duffy chooses an empowered female speaker who is ready and willing to insult and ridicule her husband. And the conclusion, as a result, humour does often come from the presentation of female characters. And that's an example of a Paper 1, Section C response. Okay, so again, you can see it's very blocky. You're not talking about multiple texts in the same paragraph. You can separate the texts for a paragraph each. And therefore you've met the requirement of the task because you have in fact spoken about 2 texts, the Anthology and Earnest. Okay, so that's another example of a Paper 1 Section C answer, and good luck with your studies. Thank you.